scripture reading for this morning comes from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 58, verses 13 and 14. If you stop trampling the Sabbath, stop doing whatever you want on my holy day, and consider the Sabbath a delight, sacred to the Lord, honored, and honor it instead of doing things your way, seeking what you want and doing business as usual, then you will take delight in the Lord. I will let you ride on the heights of the earth. I will sustain you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So I hope that you had a chance to participate in some Easter traditions last weekend. If you were with us here in worship, you certainly did. Attending church is a big tradition on Easter weekend, regardless of how religious you might consider yourself to be. We also had an Easter egg hunt afterward. We had candy. We had the flower cross. What are some other things that you might have done over Easter weekend that you consider to be Easter traditions? Easter dinner, yeah. And what is the main traditional dish on Easter? Ham. Yeah, no question. Now, some families have different traditions, but ham, right? Ham is the one. And let me tell you, it was a good day for the Publix butcher when me and an unnamed family member went and asked, how much ham do we need? And he said, I'll tell you how much ham you need. It'll feed the family for a week, and it did. And then also the trash can. But it was good. So let's let that, we did some Easter traditions. Let's go back to January, actually. Let's start back. What's the first holiday of the year? New Year's Day. Yeah, what do you do on New Year's Day? Black-eyed peas, aspirin. Yeah, what else? Make some resolutions, yeah. And then midway through the month is Martin Luther King Jr. Day and weekend. And when we lived in Athens, Georgia, it was a day of service. So we partnered with the university, as hard as that was, and then also the city government. And we went out, and our church went out and helped serve the community. How about February? What big holiday falls in February? Valentine's Day, yeah. And what do we do on Valentine's Day? Roses, yeah. More candy, yeah. Cards, right? Maybe take someone out to dinner. Another holiday in February, President's Day. Anyone got any big President's Day traditions? Most of us don't even get the day off. Some of us do. There are some holidays that are pretty prescriptive, and then some that are just kind of, that's when I go to Lowe's and get the work done, right? How about March? What's the big holiday in March? St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, what do we do on St. Patrick's Day? Eat cabbage, eat candy, partake in activities that might make us forget that it's St. Patrick's Day, necessitating the next day's aspirin. What's another big thing that we do in March generally in Florida? It's weird that it's in March, but it's Florida, so it's warm. Spring break, right? What do we do on spring break? Depends on what age you are. Yeah, the beach, yeah. Maybe some more partaking in things. How about April? How does April begin? April Fool's Day, yeah, which I totally forgot before I logged onto social media this year, and man, I got taken for a ride. What's the other big holiday usually in April? It slides around, but we celebrated last weekend, Easter, right? We've already talked about that. If you have any Jewish brothers or sisters or family members, you might celebrate Passover, that's right. How about May? What holiday is coming up? Mother's Day, all right, and what do you do on Mother's Day? Nothing. That's funny because in the first service they said, watch mom cook. Maybe more flowers, more cards, more candy, right? And then at the end of the month is Memorial Day. What do you do on Memorial Day? Huh? Parking? Barbecue. Yeah, Memorial Day is a big, grill out, yeah. Graduation also falls in May. There's all sorts of things that we do on graduation. What's coming up in June? Father's Day. What do we do on Father's Day? Nothing, right? You purchase a tie that the dad doesn't wear because dads don't wear ties anymore, right? And then, are there any ties in the room here? No, I don't think there are any ties. Look at that. Okay, just a note, just throwing that out there. What do we celebrate in July? 4th of July, Independence Day, right? What do we do on the 4th of July? Fireworks, right? We blow stuff up, that's right. And we eat as many hot dogs and burgers as we can because there's no king that can stop us, right? That's right. August doesn't really have too many official holidays, but it's back to school season. You might have like a final, what? You're back to school, right? That is a holiday for some parents, right? So you might have a tax-free week, right? It doesn't matter if you have kids, tax-free shopping, get all your pencil cases and stuff. And then in September, what do we celebrate? Labor Day. What do you do on Labor Day? Again, like the beach or Home Depot, Lowe's, just kind of a weekend off, maybe some more grilling. In October is Columbus Day. That's another one of like President's Day. Like nobody does that much anymore. What's at the end of October? Halloween. What do you do on Halloween? More candy, right? And then some of us dress up, and then some of us wait at our door for people who are dressed up, and then we give out candy. What happens in November? What happens early in November? November 11th. Veterans Day, that's right. We usually celebrate it here. We put together an awesome video of all of our amazing service members in their uniforms. We might get the day off. Again, grill out maybe, because it's Florida. It's still warm in November. What's at the end of November? Thanksgiving. What do we eat on Thanksgiving? Turkey. What else? Ham. Something. Yeah. Some of y'all are weird. Yeah. Stuffing. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. I married into a family that usually does seafood. Yeah, pumpkin spice. Yep, absolutely. Oh, that's September nowadays. It's like August, September. But yeah, pumpkin. What do we celebrate in December? Christmas. That's right. What do we do on Christmas? The birth of Jesus. That's great. That's not something we do. That is what we celebrate. What do you do on Christmas? All right. Yeah, we come to church. We buy gifts. We make everything has peppermint in it now. And then at the end of December, what do we celebrate? New Year's Eve, right? And what do we do on New Year's Eve? You go to bed at 9, and then you watch the ball drop in the morning on the news, right? I'm reaching that age. You find a YouTube version for your kids at like 7:30 p.m., and then you put them to bed. So that's kind of like the rhythm of the year, but there's also the rhythm of the seasons, right? We have a print hanging in our home office that says winter, spring, summer, college football. That's the 4 seasons. But generally, what is spring all about? New growth, allergies, yeah. How about summer? What is summer all about? Sun, fun, beach, taking some time off maybe. How about the fall? What's the fall all about? College football, yes, exactly. Yes, right. And then winter. The 3 months out of the year we can eat chili and not be just like sweating, right? There are rhythms to that, but there's also rhythms to the days of the week, right? What is Sunday generally about? Church, right? The Lord's Day. How about Monday? Worst day of the week, right? Back to the grind, yeah? How about Tuesday? What's Tuesday all about? Tacos. That's right. I love it. How about Wednesday? What was that called in a famous hump day? Yep, that's right. Who can forget that commercial? Thursday. I don't know what Thursday is. Thirsty Thursday? Okay. Some of you have just revealed what you do on Thursdays. That used to be what our daughter used just for the future. Like if something was off in the future, it was Thursday. Like, oh, we're going to do that on Thursday. Was Friday? Friday, right? The end of the week, celebrate, right? And then Saturday? Yeah, day off, chores, right? Something like that. How about the decades of your life? It might not fit your actual life, but what are generally the understood milestones you're supposed to hit when you're a teenager? Driving, right? Yeah. School, right? Maybe pushing back a little bit, starting to discover who you are. How about the 20s? What happens in your 20s? Start working, get a real job. Yeah, hopefully move out. That's not happening quite as much anymore, but move out, get a real job. In your 30s, what do? Stereotypically speaking. Family, right? Raise your kids. We're squeaking in our second one right before I turned 40, so... and then the 40s, I have no idea what 40s are supposed to be about. Does anyone have any, your eyesight starts to go. Okay, great. Awesome. How about maybe move up? Maybe this is your last chance to, kind of switch careers. I don't know. In 50s, what happens in your 50s? Getting older, yeah. Your kids maybe start to graduate or ending high school, starting to look at moving out. And then 60s, what happens? Doctor's appointments, yeah. Retirement, maybe. Yeah, 70s and onward is just like every day is a blessing, you know? How many of you have ever felt like your calendar runs your life? It's just like whatever is the next appointment, whatever's the next meeting, whatever the next, what extracurricular, whatever the next thing the school is asking me to do. Well, we did this exercise to show you that it is so much worse than you thought. It is not just your day-to-day calendar that runs your life. The calendar from day to day all the way up to the decades of your life runs your life. Now, I borrowed this exercise from the Reverend Dr. Esau McCauley. He's an Episcopal priest and author and the associate professor of New Testament at Wheaton College. And he does this exercise with the students to try to show them just how much the calendar shapes your life. Day to day, month to month, season to season, year to year, and even decade to decade, our whole life is to a degree prescribed. Now, whether you fit that or not, it doesn't always happen. But there's this sort of expectation. And did you notice it's not just what holidays we celebrate? Like you knew where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to eat, what you're supposed to wear, what songs you sing, right? How formal or informal? Is it a day where we actually celebrate something, or is it a day that we use as an excuse to get some chores done? And this rhythm, too, shapes our expectations, doesn't it? You can feel like a success or a failure based on whether you met these expectations, right? Did you get a summer vacation? Was it worth what you spent on it? Do you feel rested when you came back? If the answer is no to any of those, you might feel like a failure. Did Thanksgiving or Christmas go exactly as you imagined? Did you nail the favorite recipe? Were the fireworks good? There's a word for what groups of people do together, and that word is liturgy. Now wait, this is like a churchy word, but it means the work of the people. Oftentimes it just applies to like the scriptures we read, the prayers we pray, but it means what a group of people do together. And whether we call this liturgy, whether we call all of those calendars liturgy, there are. And whether we recognize it or not, I think we need to be more intentional about what our calendars do for us. Let's just take the word holiday. The word holiday is a mashup of two words. What words? You know this. Holy day, right. Holy day. We've got all sorts of secular and civic holidays now, but they started as holy days. And you know what it was all about? It was like, what do we pause our life for? What is worth pausing our life? And even now, in today's world, a world all about how much can you make? How much can you produce? How valuable are you to the people around you? Taking a day off of work, stopping making money or stopping producing or stopping serving some group of people for a day, that's a big deal, right? What's worth stopping for? So the question is, what are our calendars teaching us, and what are they encouraging us to value? And I think all of these calendars we went through, it's a mixed bag, isn't it? There are plenty of things that are absolutely worth celebrating, and we should. I think it's great that we have Thanksgiving. And I think as people of faith, we are very intentional about making our gratitude to God a part of our Thanksgiving celebration. But I think it's good, and I think it's healthy for our nation, that even people who aren't religious or are of different religions to also spend a day giving thanks. I think that's helpful. I think it's important that we celebrate Veterans Day and Memorial Day. I think it's important, too, that we have days where we recognize the heritage of people that make up the fabric of America. So like St. Patrick's Day and Cinco de Mayo. But when you get there, you begin to ask not whether we should celebrate that day, but the way we celebrate it. Is that within the spirit of what it's for? Is it accomplishing what it's meant to accomplish? Perhaps the deeper question is, does the calendar that we live out consciously or consciously, unconsciously or consciously, does the calendar we are living by and shaping our life pointing us to God, or is it pointing us to something else that wants to take the place of God and God's values in our life? And I am more and more coming to believe that if you can control your calendar, you can change your life. Control your calendar, change your life. Now, that is a very bumper sticker statement, and hopefully you know me well enough to know that then comes with a bunch of caveats, because I'm a person of nuance. I'm not real good at creating that social media moment where I just say some bumper sticker slogan, then it goes wild on social media. And here's just a couple of pieces of nuance that I think I need to throw out there. And the first is, how much control you have over your calendar really varies from person to person and what stage you are in your life, right? Some of us might have great flexibility and margin. Others of us don't. Some of us don't now, but we will later. Some of us did and we don't now. Whether you're single or you're married factors into it. Whether you have kids or no kids factors into it. Whether those kids are at home or moved away factors into it. Your type of career, your stage of career. Some people have jobs where you clock in and you clock out and you don't have to think about it in between. And then others have jobs where you're essentially mentally and emotionally on call 24/7. Secondly, the goal of controlling your calendar is not calling all of the shots in your life. But it's about being intentional about who does have influence over your calendar and who doesn't. And even which calendars take precedent. Because there's a hard truth underneath all of this. So we had our bumper sticker statement. We've had our moments of nuance, but here's the hard truth. calendars are going to conflict. You can't do everything. You can't meet every demand, and you cannot please everyone. And that's hard for me to say because I am a people-pleasing perfectionist. Like, all of those things are antithetical to the way that I operate in the world, but it's true, and it's a hard truth. Now, here's the thing. I know you know that. None of you are like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that before, because this room is full of busy people. Even those of you who are retired are busy people, and I'm a busy person. And we balance competing demands all the time, and I also want to say very clearly from the front that I absolutely know that the church is one of the competing demands that you balance. So the question isn't, are there competing demands? The question is, what do we do about them? And how do we choose which demands we will meet and which demands we won't meet? And I think oftentimes in today's world, our default is about consequences and reducing consequences. Oftentimes, we make our decisions around what only happens one time in one place, and so I have to be there. So I'm going to make it to that. And then if there's something that's optional or doesn't have that much of a consequence, I'll go if I have time and energy, if I'm interested, and if not, no worries, I just won't go. And then if something can be time shifted and slipped into an open place in my schedule later, maybe I'll do that. And we try to help with this here in the church, right? We're live streaming right now, and some of you are watching this right now live on Sunday morning. But I know some of you are watching it Sunday night or Monday morning. Some of you might be watching this as a sermon video on YouTube or Facebook. Some of you might be listening to this as a sermon podcast as you're driving around later this week. But if we schedule our lives around minimizing consequences, what is that teaching us and our families? How is it shaping us? The priority isn't what's most important. Did you notice that? The priority isn't what's most important. The priority isn't what's the best way to engage what's most important. But the priority becomes, how can I do as much as possible and please as many other people as possible? Look, we're going to continue live streaming. We're going to continue recording our sermon videos and releasing them as audio because it's really, I think, helpful. But there's also a way to misuse it, isn't there? If church or the sermon just becomes like another show on your DVR that you just get to eventually, I need to catch up on the sermons. I got 3, I'll listen to them when I get. That's not what church is about. So if life becomes about doing as much as possible and pleasing or appeasing as many groups or people as possible, what we're telling ourselves and our spouses and our families or our parents or our kids or our neighbors or our loved ones is just like, do as much as you can if you can find a way to fit it in, even if the fit isn't ideal. And I need this reminder as much as anybody else. I've shared with you before that I do a morning Bible reading, and right now I'm engaging with a prayer podcast, and I would love to just tell you that it's perfect every morning, and I fit it in, and it's great, and I have this wonderful quiet hour every morning. But there are some days where I come out and I sit down in my chair, and I have 7 minutes to read 4 chapters and do a 13-minute prayer podcast. I'm good, but I'm not that good. Right? So on those mornings, I skim my Bible reading, and then I play the prayer podcast in the car, or I play the prayer podcast as I'm doing my hair, which takes approximately 13 minutes. And, that's not the most focused prayer time in the world. I'm getting closer to heaven, but it's not the most effective way of doing it. Now, is it better that I tried to do it? Is it better that I at least engaged it than not? Yeah, absolutely. But is that really how it's supposed to be? Can I really argue that I didn't have 13 minutes at some point in the day? Some days I could argue that I don't, but the vast majority of days, that argument doesn't fly. And again, this isn't about having 100% control over your calendar. I am no more saying do only what you want than I'm saying do what everyone wants. What I am saying is that we have to take seriously the fact that our calendar shapes us. And we have to be aware of who is shaping us, how they are shaping us, and what they're shaping us into. And if we do that, it's going to require us to make difficult choices, choosing best over better, healthier over more. It might require us to challenge and even reject the common patterns of the culture and the world. And there may be consequences to that. Dr. Macaulay says there's no greater rebellion in today's world than to mark time differently. There's no greater rebellion in today's world than to mark time differently. You know what's true about rebellions? They have consequences. But, he asks, who gets to tell us how we spend our time. Who do we want telling us how to spend our time? You know, in the Old Testament, God intentionally set up and used the calendar to shape God's people. There were 7 festivals every year. The number 7 in the Old Testament stands for wholeness and completeness. This is how we spend a year following God, is celebrating these 7 festivals. And if you're likely familiar with any of them, probably familiar with the one our friends celebrated last weekend, Passover. And what is Passover? It is a multimedia reminder of the foundational story of the Old Testament. There's reading, there's singing, there's praying, there's foreign languages, there's food, there's questions, there's kids, there's running, there's laughing, there's chanting. It is an incredible celebration that helps people remember and celebrate when God performed the rescue. And it is no mistake that Jesus attached his death and resurrection to that holiday. And God also said, you must celebrate this. Everyone must celebrate it, and it has to be celebrated on this one particular day. Why? Why one particular day and not just, hey, remember this story, it's important, you should read it every year? Well, part of it is to ground it in history, to say every year at this time or on this date or around this time, this actually happened. This is a historical thing that we remember. But also, how many of you have things on your to-do list that are when I get around to it? How long have they been there? I have a to-do list program on my phone and on my computer, and there are things on there that have been there for more than a year. And they're not just like simple, some of them are important things. But what happens when you put something on the calendar? It doesn't guarantee you'll do it, but you're much more likely to do it. If there's a specific day, it says this is a priority, and everything else fits around this day. Now, the interesting thing is, a little bit down the road, some people came to Moses and said, look, I know this is God's law, but this just doesn't seem fair. I had to be away, and so I couldn't celebrate it. Or my dad died, and I had to take care of his body. That made me unclean. Or you know, for some of the women, it might have been a time when they were unclean during the month, and so they couldn't celebrate. Their competing demands. God says celebrate it, but if you're unclean, you can't celebrate it. But it's not that I don't want to. I want to celebrate it, but I can only celebrate it on one day. And so Moses went to God, and God said, hey, they actually have a point. Let's come up with a backup day. And so they came up with a backup day, but it was a backup day. There's another day. It's still important to schedule your life around. Now, look, it isn't my expectation or even my recommendation that you keep the full daily calendar of the church and start skipping Little League practice because it's the feast of Saint so-and-so and you've got to go home and learn how to make hot cross buns or something like that. I hope that you have or are working toward a daily practice of scripture reading and prayer. But my recommendation today is that if you really want to begin using the rhythms of your calendar to say, God, I will follow you and challenge the patterns of this world, start with Sabbath. Sabbath was one of the 7 yearly festivals, but it wasn't practiced just once a year. It was a weekly festival. Did you remember that Sabbath is one of the 10 Commandments? How often do we point to the 10 Commandments and talk about how important they are? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't covet, don't make idols, don't worship other gods. How many times do you hear the Sabbath mentioned in there? Where does Sabbath come from? Who are we patterning this rhythm after? God. And on what page of the Bible? One, the first one, right? The first of the 2 creation stories. God creates for 6 days. The work is done. God rests on the 7th day. And it says, I want you to follow this rhythm too. Okay, productive people, what just bugged you? You know it. Is the work ever done? Is there anyone other than God that can finish all the work in 6 days? Our work is never done. There's always more to do, whether we need to do it or just want to do it or just could do it. So my first thought is, if you feel so overwhelmed that the thought of taking one day off gives you a panic attack, maybe you need to reevaluate your calendar and your to-do list and the expectations on you, but that's a different sermon. You just might need to hear that today. But even a regular weekly workload is rarely broken down into 6-day chunks. But here's the interesting thing embedded in this story. The first 6 days all have a beginning and an end. They all say there was evening and there was morning the first day, evening and morning the second day, evening and morning, and so on. That does not show up on the 7th day. What the story is trying to communicate is that once God's work was done, we got to enter into an eternal seventh-day Sabbath rest. But what did God also give us at the tail end of day 6? A job to do. And a very important job. You're going to be my image on earth. You're going to represent me on earth. You're going to be the bridge between earth and heaven. You are going to be fruitful and multiply. You're going to ensure that all creation is fruitful and multiplies. And if we've learned anything in the last 10,000 years, that's hard to do, isn't it? We weren't given a simple job. We were given a hard job to do, and we're supposed to do it during this never-ending seventh day of rest. How does that work? Well, that's because the Sabbath rest was not about doing nothing. It was about creating a rhythm in which we intentionally remember that everything we have and everything we will ever need is provided by God. And God makes this very plain when the people of God are wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. God brings manna, rains it from heaven. It's like these little flakes that they can turn into bread. Well, for the first 5 days, how long does that manna last? 24 hours. And if you have any left over, it starts to rot the next morning. God said, get only what you need for literally your daily bread. But then on the 6th day, how long does that manna last? 2 days. Why? So you don't have to collect on the 7th day. It's not like it was different manna. It's not like God's like, well, I need the 1 day here, and then I need the 2 day kind. God is providing for God's people, but also saying, I'm going to give you a break. We don't take Sabbath rest because the work is done, and we don't wait to take Sabbath rest until the work is done. We take Sabbath rest as a way of saying the world doesn't revolve and rely only on me. Sometimes it's put this way, it reminds us that we're human beings, not human doings. And what happens if we start to live into this rhythm? God, through the prophet Isaiah, tells us. That was our passage today from chapter 58. If you stop trampling the Sabbath, stop doing whatever you want on my holy day, and consider the Sabbath a delight, sacred to the Lord, honored, and honor it instead of doing things your way, seeking what you want and doing business as usual, then you will take delight in the Lord. I will let you ride on the heights of the earth. I will sustain you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. Here's maybe a better bumper sticker. Delight in the Sabbath and you'll delight in God. Delight in the Sabbath and you'll delight in God. It makes sense, doesn't it? If you regularly remind yourself that everything you'll ever need, God will make sure you have. If we take 1 day out of 7 to remind ourselves to be grateful and to rest, and then all that pressure we feel the other 6 days is just pressure and not the actual weight of the world, that's going to start to feel good. So, of course, in our modern mind, the question crops up, how in the world am I supposed to take a full day off? How does that work? I mean, how many of you are struggling with that right now? You're like, I hear what you're saying, Pastor, but it just doesn't work. Well, number one, you don't have to at first. Discipleship is a journey. I've been saying repeatedly for months, maybe a year now, following Jesus is about taking your next faithful step. And sometimes that faithful step is a small step, sometimes it's a giant leap. But maybe you start with an hour, and then you start with 2 hours, and then you start with half a day. Then maybe you move to 1 day a month and work up from there. But the second one is, maybe this is how you start. You just do it. You just do it. Make the hard choice. Understand that it comes with consequences. Here's a little tip. Put it on your calendar. What happens when you say, I'm going to rest on Saturday, and then someone says, hey, you want to come help me move? Or, hey, we really need you to come into work. We got a big project. And there's nothing on your calendar. You know you wanted to rest with God, but you're like, I can't. Put it on your calendar. Schedule it. It's important. Prioritize your life based on what is most important and who gets to control it. But even here, we might start to then fall into the trap that God's people did when they were figuring out how to practice the Sabbath, and that is regulating it and making the regulations the point. I mean, so many of the conflicts that Jesus had with the religious leaders was about what he did or didn't do on the Sabbath. Sometimes Jesus literally did things you weren't supposed to be doing. Sometimes it was just that there were extra regulations that people added that are not in the law. Sometimes what Jesus gets busted for is not in the Old Testament law, but it got added by someone along the way. Sometimes it comes from a super strict interpretation of something that was there. And then sometimes it's just that the religious leaders, in their humanity, had forgotten the point of the Sabbath. A very famous example comes from Mark chapter 2. Jesus went through the wheat fields on the Sabbath, and as the disciples made their way, they were picking the heads of wheat. The Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they breaking the Sabbath law?" What are they doing? They're snacking. They're walking through a wheat field and just grabbing a few heads of grain here and there, popping them in their mouth so they have something to chew on. You know what the religious leaders accused them of doing? Harvesting. And yeah, you probably shouldn't bust out the John Deere and try to harvest your whole field on the Sabbath. That feels like it goes against the spirit of the Sabbath. But snacking as you wander through a wheat field, that's a stretch to me. And Jesus responded to them, "Haven't you ever read what David did?" This is cold, man. Of course they know what David did. They're religious leaders. They have the whole Old Testament memorized. David is like, even if they didn't, they memorized the stories of David because David's one of the most famous people in the Old Testament. Jesus said to them, "Haven't you ever read what David did when he was in need? When he and those with him were hungry? During the time when Abiathar was high priest, David went into God's house and ate the bread of the presence, which only the priests were allowed to eat. And he also gave bread to those who were with him." This is even more outrageous than just snacking on some grain as you walk through the field. David walked in to the tabernacle, which was the mobile temple where the presence of God was, and he went up and he grabbed literally God's own bread. And you might say, well, he's the king, he can do whatever he wants, but God kicked Saul out of the role of king for doing what priests were only supposed to do, and yet here's David grabbing the bread of the presence. Not only does he eat it, he also gives it to all of his soldiers. Jesus is making a point. Human need comes first. But again, hear that human need. What did Isaiah accuse people of doing? Doing what they wanted. When we look at what Jesus does on the Sabbath, sometimes intentionally to draw conflict, but other times just responding to need, what kinds of things does he do? He feeds people. He heals people. And what does that communicate? That everything we have and everything we need will be provided by God. To me, that sounds like the spirit of the Sabbath. And so Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was created for humans. Humans weren't created for the Sabbath. This is why the human one is Lord even over the Sabbath. You see, the Sabbath is a gift. It's a gift that reminds us of all of the gifts. Isaiah doesn't say, take the time off and sit there anxiously waiting until you can start working again. What did Isaiah call us to do? Delight in the Sabbath. Delight in the Sabbath, and you will delight in the Lord. So take time to do something you love that reminds you of God's blessings. Or take the time to do nothing to remind you of God's blessings. So for some of us, it might mean gardening or golfing, baseball or boating, cooking or crafting, reading or running, hiking or having mommy-daddy time, sleeping or serving others, taking a drive or tidying the house, enjoying music or entering into silence. The point is, if our calendars and how we mark and spend time shapes us, then it is worth reevaluating who gets our time, how much they get, and why they get it. It's worth asking what the schedules we keep and the expectations we have are saying to our own hearts, saying to our families, saying to our friends, saying to God. And it's so vitally important to remind ourselves that the time God asks us to give to God is not only for his glory, but it's also for our good. Amen.